The Devil Called. On the night of September the 6th, 2010, something incredible happened. What it was and what it is connected with remains a mystery to me. That evening, only my mother and I were at home. My brother was spending the night with his girlfriend. My mum was sitting in the kitchen and I went to bed at about 11:30, but I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning because the house phone was ringing. We have a loud house phone. It rang for a long time and persistently, despite the hour. Oddly enough, I had no desire to pick up the phone, although when I wake up, checking my cell phone is a reflex. Moreover, it became scary from the persistence of the caller. I ended up picking the phone up and then slamming it back down, hanging up on the call, and then went back to sleep with a clear conscience. 15 minutes passed and the phone rang again. I started feeling super uneasy. This time my mother answered the phone and, oddly enough, also hung up on the caller without answering it, although she seemed not to have noticed when it rang before. I managed to fall asleep for a few minutes before a loud thud woke me up to the sound of someone hitting the kitchen window, twice with an interval of a second. The bangs were very hard, but not as if it had been done with a fist or a stick. I later tried it myself, and the sound is completely different. But as if someone was hitting the glass with their whole body. I got up and ran to my mum's room and asked if she had heard the same thing as me. She confirmed what she heard. I thought maybe it was some drunks because we live on the first floor in a standard brick 5-story building, and as no other sound was heard, I cautiously went into the kitchen. There was no one at the window or on the street, but our 2 cats were very scared of something. After checking the kitchen and going out to the balcony, I found nothing and went to bed. Mum and I were very frightened. We began to say our prayers and tried to fall asleep again. As we lay down in my mum's room, I saw a large dark mass form from the corner of my eyes. I began to tremble as I slowly turned my head to the side. The mass dissipated before my eyes and the cats began to rush from corner to corner. It got creepy. Mum stood up and went to the large crucifix next to the Bible we had on the wall and began to read prayers. Then the phone rang, again for the 3rd time. I hung up the call and started praying, holding my hand over the phone. I was shivering from fear. I could hardly squeeze out the words. Our Father. The time on the clock was somewhere between 3:30 and 4. It was all eerily quiet as the seconds ticked on by the clock. Suddenly there were 5 more powerful blows to the kitchen window, even stronger and more insistent than before. I was already shaking with fear. Prayers were Reading the prayers out loud became super difficult. The cats seemed to have gone crazy. They were hissing and yowling as they skittered across the floor. We buried ourselves in the quilt covers and began to cower in silence until enough time had passed and I decided to go back out onto the balcony and see if any damage had been done or if we could see an intruder. Again, there was no one on the street. What it was and why it came, I do not know. Mum and I were only able to fall asleep after a few hours, once the sun had rose. But I had never experienced such a scary thing in all my life. A few days later, I spoke to our neighbours upstairs to see if they had heard anything or seen anything, but they said they didn't. But what creeped me out even more was the fact that the neighbours told me our entire apartment block was built on the site of a very old burial ground, and supposedly, once every 10 years, the bodies of those who were laid to rest there and whose peace was disturbed come out at night and scare the people who live there. Rules. They should be repeated regularly. If you are in complete darkness and drop a small, easy-to-lose thing on the floor, you must find it immediately. You don't need to know what they might use it for. Don't ever play Disney movies backwards. Ever. You must not turn your back on dolls in an empty room. If you hear a whisper from the bathroom in the middle of the night, do not go out into the corridor. They can't reach you until you get up to turn on the light. If a child has died in the room, it is very easy to find out. At night, turn off the lights and place a large mirror in the centre of it. Walk around the room 3 times, clockwise, along the walls, and take a quick look in the mirror. If he knocks on the window, the main thing is not to meet his eyes. Otherwise, you will find yourself opening it for him. Every church has something to protect it, and at night it is also very hungry. They are afraid of fire, but they love water. If a faucet is dripping in the kitchen, do not try to turn it off. Their screams in the pipes will drive you crazy. The poem, Death of a Pioneer, contains the text of the spell. You don't have to read it out loud in its entirety. They have tortured you many times already, but each time they erased your memory. In fact, all these small sounds and sudden frights are only needed to exhaust you. They get real power in dreams, in your dreams. When the walls begin to shrink, just know they are close. But I hope none of you need this, because they are the ones who did this to me. Red signal. I work as an assistant driver in the open spaces of the Russian railway network. We work in pairs, the driver himself and his faithful assistant. Once my partner got sick, so I was sent to work with another driver. We met before the trip and had a chat, and that's when I asked, "Where is your assistant?" He didn't pass the medical examination because his hands were shaking too much, he answered. Well, that didn't sound normal to me. Perhaps he suffered from an undiagnosed illness. I quickly changed the subject. We became friends, one might say. There were plenty of topics for conversation. He, like me, went to the gym and was a proud Muscovite, so we had plenty to chat about all the way there. When we were finished, we had a short break and drove the train back. This train came with explosive materials, so a security guard always came back with us. For the transportation of hazardous substances, there is a separate railway track that is remote from the main track, which passes through forests and fields. This is where we encountered something creepy. It was late at night. We were chatting away when suddenly incomprehensible sounds and whispers are heard coming from the radio. I picked up the radio to listen, bringing the speaker closer to my ears, when suddenly the engineer's face grew terrified and he shouted at me to quickly hang it up. In bewilderment, I put it down, asking what was the reason for such a snap reaction, and he said, "Well, you remember when I told you my assistant's hands were shaking?" He heard the same thing, whispering from the walkie-talkie, and just like you went to do, he went in to listen to what the voices were saying. They told him something, but he wouldn't say what they told him. All he said was it was a voice of some old woman, and his hands shook the next day. I don't know if he was joking, but I wasn't taking the chance. The desire to listen to the radio immediately disappeared. I started asking questions about her, and he said that there was a village on the hill in which the old woman lived, and her grandfather had left her the radio equipment. Many times people at work had complained about her tuning into the frequency, interfering with their work. They conducted an investigation and found out it was her, but for some reason, even after the investigation, she continued to transmit her messages, and no action was taken by the police. A little later, we had stopped in front of a red signal, our version of a traffic light, but for railways. It's not like the traffic lights on the road for cars. These red lights can keep you waiting for up to 10 hours in a row. The topic of the old woman was soon forgotten and replaced by jokes and all sorts of other chatter, helping pass the time. A few hours later, still standing at the red signal, the security guard, with eyes like giant saucers, came running back from the back cabin and saying there was an old lady outside in a nightgown and she's barefoot. I laughed nervously, but it's really late and dark outside. We're in late autumn and it's been snowing. It's below zero out there. Remembering the creepy old woman on the radio, we ran to lock the doors of the train, then ran back to the cockpit. We turned off the lights and sat in silence. I was too afraid to look out of the window. Everything was silent for a few minutes, until we heard someone wandering around outside the train, and that's when they began to knock on the doors, with pitiful wailing and pleading for help. The driver leaned out the window to see who was there, because you never know. Maybe somebody really was in need of help. But he immediately closed the window and walked away. It didn't take long to see why. On the track we could see the old woman running around and cackling hysterically. To say we were scared is an understatement. 3 fully grown men were sat huddled together and terrified like small children. But luckily for us, the yellow light came. and we were soon on our way. After we returned safely to the depot, we told the other workers what had happened, and to which we were told that this was not an isolated case, but she had never come this close to the train before. She only sat nearby and occasionally shouted something from time to time. Who she really was, I don't know. Maybe just a sick old woman. Maybe some kind of witch. Either way, what I do know is that I never want to find out. Hi everyone, thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. If you did enjoy the video, please do give me a thumbs up and possibly subscribe if you'd like to. That would really make me so happy, and I'd be eternally grateful. Yes, as you can tell, I'm completely new at this. But yes, thank you for your support, and I hope to see you in the next video.